The most recent issue of X-Men number 20 has got me really thinking about something that has been on my mind for a very long time, even going all the way back to maybe about 15, maybe even almost 20 years ago. And it's something that has always lived rent-free in my head ever since I first heard it. Humans don't hate mutants. They hate the X-Men.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
What is up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It is your boy Ernie the Blerd Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Like I said, this most recent issue of X-Men, while it doesn't necessarily push the narrative forward on the Age of Revelation stuff that's coming up, it does do some interesting things in varying degrees, but the thing I really want to focus on is the interaction between Cyclops and Agent Lundqvist. And what's going on here is that Lundqvist is upset with Cyclops, and rightfully so, I think, because Cyclops lied to him. The whole thing that happened with Ben Liu in the early issues of the Jed MacKay X-Men run, where Cyclops basically told the O&E that Ben Liu was dead, and he very clearly is not. He has been literally seen on live television during the debacle with 3K, where Cassandra Nova was manipulating Robin Cobb, the unborn sister of Piper Cobb, who lived on through Piper's DNA and then later on in life as her X gene activated. The essence of Robin that was still within Piper detached herself from Piper and turned herself into a monster and was running roughshod over Merle, Alaska, where the Alaskan X-Men have been hanging their hat. And while all of that came out in the wash, it still left a bad taste in Lundqvist's mouth, largely because it made him look inept at his job and probably put his job in mortal peril, most likely, I would say. He's probably one nut hair away from being in the unemployment line because he believed Cyclops' lies. Now, to be fair, I don't think the Cyclops is wrong for doing what he did. And honestly, I don't think Lundqvist is wrong for feeling how he feels. This is one of those situations where two things can be right at the same time. But what happens is they get into a fist fight, one that I know some people were kind of laughing at Cyclops for, Lundqvist beating his ass or the perception of such, but let's really understand something here. Cyclops let that happen because if he did fight back against Lundqvist any harder than what he ultimately did in that interaction, all it would have done was give Lundqvist the only reason he would need to try to put Cyclops away for the rest of his life. Or even just unilaterally, publicly execute him if he wanted to. Maybe, who knows. But one of the new characters introduced in Jed MacKay's X-Men series, Chief Robbins, she steps into the fray and she shuts the whole thing down. She tases both characters and puts them in the town jail. And when this happens, the two characters have what I think is one of the more interesting interactions between characters who are diametrically opposed in an X-Men fashion that I've seen in quite some time. Now, they're put in neighboring jail cells, and while their cells are side by side, they start to have a conversation. One that I think is long overdue for these two characters, especially considering some of the interactions and those being limited as they were. I was like, dude, yeah, this is something I wanted to see. I wanted to actually get what Lundqvist's deal was, because typically the O&E has long been a anti-mutant organization, and Lundqvist just seemed like just another dude who hated mutants. But as it turns out, that's not the case. When Cyclops is talking to him, he asked him, what is it about mutants? Is this personal? Is it abstract? Did a mutant kill someone you love? Did you lose something because of mutants? Were you passed over because of mutants? Or do you just hate mutants just to hate them? And Lundqvist basically kind of does this thing that I don't want to make it seem like I'm giving Lundqvist cookies for having this answer. I'm not giving him cookies. I'm looking at this answer because it kind of calls back to a thing that some friends of mine and I used to always talk about when it came to the X-Men, that people don't hate mutants. They hate the X-Men because they feel like the X-Men are either A, assholes, or B, holier than thou. Well, yes, I'm not saying there aren't people who hate mutants. Yes, the William Strikers and the Donald Pierces of the world, they exist. I think someone brought up Orcus as an example. The truth about Orcus is they hated everybody. They focused on mutants because mutants are an easy target. They actually hated humans too. because Orchis was an artificial intelligence organization. They just used humans to go after mutants because it was easy to turn the two against each other. But that's a story for another day. That I don't have the time or the crayons to fully break that down for people right now. What I am going to say is that what Lundquist is doing here, the reason why I'm not giving him cookies for saying what he says, even though I do kind of agree with what he says, on the surface level of it, that people don't hate mutants, they hate the X-Men, is because he's technically using a MAGA talking point. Basically, when people who are part of MAGA are accused of being racist, and they say, oh, there's no such thing as racism in this country, he's basically pulling that. He's pulling a Nikki Haley.
We're not a racist country, Brian. We've never been a racist country.
Meanwhile, Nikki Haley was a woman who her real actual government name is Nimrata. And I know what you're thinking, she's not a white woman named Nimrata. That woman is Indian. He changed her entire persona to fit what white people would feel more comfortable around. So she's not really a good example of America not being a racist country. And we've also had other politicians and, social media and political pundits try and, talk about the fact that, oh no, people aren't really racist, you're overthinking it. That's kind of what I took from Lundquist here, but he does technically make a smidgen of sense. Why I say that is because, yes, he doesn't hate mutants. He says, I hate you, meaning the X-Men, but more specifically Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. He doesn't like Cyclops because he understands what mutants are. He knows that not all mutants are dangerous, and he is also keenly aware that no one chooses to be a mutant, so his hatred is more individually directed. That part I do actually believe Lundquist about, because that's something that I think people tend to forget about. Mutants are not a monolith, and even though technically people tend to use, and there's been commentary over this for the past decade or so, especially during the Krakoan era, that people often just associate mutants with X-Men. People just automatically assume every mutant is an X-Man, when that's not really the case. There's mutants running around the Marvel Comics universe who are not X-Men at all. There's characters like Judas Traveler or Typhoid Mary. These are characters who are mutants but don't hang out with mutants. And before anyone says Cloak and Dagger, let me shut you down. Cloak and Dagger are not mutants. They were originally believed to be mutants. They are not mutants. They are mutant allies, or I would actually say allies because they don't really hang out with the X-Men like that. I would love to say they were accomplices, but they are just allies. And allies are performative at best, but that's neither here nor there. The thing that really nailed it all home for me though, yeah, the X-Men perceptively cause trouble, and that there are mutants who people assume are X-Men who cause trouble, and that when those mutants cause trouble, and even when the X-Men step in and stop them, people just assume, well, oh, they're only here because of you. It's kind of like that classic thing that people do with superheroes, even when it's not mutant related, like, oh, well, the only reason this thing happened is because you're around. That's why these bad guys are attacking us, why these aliens are attacking. It's because you, whatever you are the reason why. And I think that's what it is for a lot of people by and large. But yes, there are people who genuinely hate mutants. And there's also people who dislike mutants for weird reasons. We saw this with Piper Cobb and her mother just a couple of issues ago. We saw in X-Men number 18 when Piper and Robin's mom was lamenting how she lost Robin, that she was absorbed in the womb by Piper. She talked about how it made her scared. It scared her that her child just disappeared in the womb, and it wasn't something supernatural. It wasn't anything that was extra normal or anything like that. It was just nature taking its course, and it freaked her out so bad that there was nothing that could protect her or any of her children from something like that. And it scared her so much that she became radicalized. That with everything that was going on, especially in the wake of Krakoa and the whole mutant plague, that people were randomly turning into mutants, she got radicalized because she was listening to all these fucking podcasts and things of that nature, most likely. She was listening to the online sentiment and the mainstream media sentiment that basically perpetuated the idea that mutants were out there mutinizing their kids. It's the same thing they use for trans people. Say, oh, schools are out here transing kids, or whatever. That's not a real thing. She fell for the trap. That's what happened. But in the case of Agent Lundquist, that's not the case. He completely gets it. He is looking at this objectively and under the cold light and framing of one of my favorite movies, Battle Royale. The movie is not named exactly, but I mean, the description basically gives it away. He says that I saw a movie on TV one time in a hotel. A whole class of teenagers get sent to an island and they have to kill each other to survive. And while Cyclops is familiar with the movie, I actually, at first, when they were talking about this, I thought they were actually gonna dig into some Avengers Arena shenanigans, because Avengers Arena is basically just a shameless Battle Royale homage, which I'm totally here for, even though it does do some characters dirty as hell, and there's a lot of characters that were from that series that have never really recovered from that. But basically, Lundquist goes on to say that they're not expected to kill one another barehanded. No, they've been given a weapon, but they're not the same. One kid gets a shotgun, one kid gets a pot lid, one kid gets an Uzi, one kid gets a fork. None of those kids in the movie asked for this, just like none of you asked for your X genes to activate when you were kids, but all the same, they did. And lots of you ended up with pot lids and forks, but some of you end up with Uzis and shotguns, which is where the ONE comes in. And at the end of the day, I agree with Cyclops. This is a very convenient story that Lundquist can tell himself that you can justify his actions, but at the end of the day, Lundquist isn't wrong. Some mutants are born with useless powers. Look at Cypher. Cypher used to have a useless power up until recently. Over the course of the last decade or so, Cypher's power has been upgraded to the point where he has to be taken more seriously, even before the Revelation glow up. But also, Lundquist is correct in how Charles Xavier used Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Angel as child soldiers. He even calls them X-Gene war boys, which isn't an unfair statement at all. But yes, at the end of the day, I do think that Lundquist is, while he may be misguided in his thought process, I think he's actually legitimately genuine in his sentiment towards Cyclops. He doesn't like him. He, in all likelihood, hates him a lot more than he's even letting on. And he has said a lot about how much he doesn't like him, how much he hates him, so that should tell you something. But nonetheless, I do agree with some of his sentiment. There are people out there who don't hate mutants. They hate the X-Men because they see the X-Men as causing trouble. And it's almost kind of like how, and I think some people kind of struggled with this with Star Wars, how I think if you were one of those people who used to read like the Star Wars novelizations or any of the expanded universe stuff that's now no longer canon, even though some of it is slowly coming back into canon, one of the things I saw that a lot of people couldn't get jiggy with was the fact that they didn't like the idea of the Jedi being depicted as, stealing children or just unilaterally taking children. But the thing is, it's something that's always, at least for, I won't say always, but for the longest time, at least since the prequels, has been a thing with the Jedi. I think it's just that people didn't pay it any real attention. It's kind of the same thing with Charles Xavier. I think people perceive the X-Men as just taking whatever mutant children they deem necessary, which isn't necessarily the case. They don't do that. A lot of the mutant children who showed up on Charles Xavier's doorstep came to him either willingly or their parents brought them to the school hoping that maybe they could be fixed. Their kids could be fixed or whatever. And that's just kind of what it comes down to. But what I did appreciate about this is it was actually nice to see Cyclops have a conversation with Lundquist, one that, while yes, it started with fisticuffs, it did end with an actual conversation, one that doesn't go anywhere, but it does at least tell us a little bit more about who Lundquist is and why this isn't necessarily personal for him. I think that framing is important because it lets you know that while Lundquist is, quotey fingers, anti-mutant, it's actually more in the anti-X-Men category than it is anti-mutant, if that makes any sense. It doesn't mean that the ONE isn't going to be out here doing crazy stuff. They most likely will still be doing wild and crazy stuff. Once again, it does actually put him in a very specific box. He's not in the William Stryker box. He's not in the Donald Pierce box. He's not a guy who seems very interested in genociding mutants. He seems like he's more in the control category as opposed to the annihilation category. That doesn't make him any better. That actually makes him just as bad. I mean, there's really is two sides of the same coin. But at least when we flip that coin, we know what side it lands on. We know what we're dealing with. But I love the idea of some humans not hating mutants in general, but hating X-Men, not because I think that just makes hatred better, but because it makes it even more of a commentary on real life. Think about it. People who others consider activists because of their actions and their advocacy for marginalized communities, or even more specifically, people who self-identify as activists for marginalized communities. Who do bigots tend to hate more? The community itself or the people who stand up for that community? I don't know if that's what Jed MacKay is going for here, but that's what feels right. The X-Men aren't just mutants, they're activists. They are the equivalent of the people who go out into the street and protest and stand up for people who either can't stand up for themselves or no one else will stand up for those people. That is what the X-Men is all about. So of course, someone like Lundquist would find Cyclops so annoying. Of course he would probably hate X-Men more than he hates mutants, if he hates mutants at all, which he seems to be of the belief that he doesn't. He seems to not have a problem with the community of mutants. He has a problem with its cheerleaders. And that's a fair statement to make. I say the same thing about religion all the time. I'm not an atheist because I hate God. I'm actually more of an atheist because people who claim to be Christian are so fucking awful and annoying and insufferable in how they claim to be so godly, but oftentimes aren't, and hold people to standards they don't even follow themselves. There's also other reasons why I'm an atheist, but this is not what that video is about. But my point is just to say that, yeah, I get it. I totally get where Lundquist is coming from. That doesn't mean that he's right, but it makes what he says make that much more sense. Framing it as hating the activists and hating the cheerleaders of the community rather than the community itself. I think it tracks. Now, the other bombshell that comes up in this issue is that the O&E has a new boss. And Lundquist doesn't say who it is, but he lets us know what they are. And it kind of lets you know why he's not exactly as anti-mutant as some might think, or at the very least, he's okay with a good mutant, quotey fingers good mutant now and then, which is made even more interesting by the fact that we know that the O&E has a splinter cell operation called Zero, who believes there are no good mutants, and now gives context to why Zero exists. It's very likely because they have a new mutant boss. Now, I do wonder, because of everything that's been set up here, they say that this guy is a nightmare. He doesn't say who it is, but considering everything that's going on lately, I have to wonder, who this character might be. Now, granted, this is Jed MacKay writing the story, and Jed MacKay is notorious for setting up a reveal, but then giving you the reveal, and then it lands like a wet fart. And this is not a knock against Jed MacKay. He is still one of my personal favorite writers, but I can literally count at least 2, possibly 3 times he's done something like this, and then you're like, ooh, who could it be? And then all of the most reasonable and logical explanations that could pop into any X-Men fan's head, while they seem so incredibly correct, Jed MacKay will always pick somebody no one's thinking about. And I would even say sometimes to his detriment. I don't blame him for this because he wasn't writing this. It reminds me of the Benjamin Percy X-Force reveal about Xeno, when everyone wanted to know who the hell was the peacock tattooed man, Mr. Peacock, as I used to call him. But when he revealed himself that he was the new Engineer, there were a lot of people who were like, who? Now, once again, that was Benjamin Percy. That was not Jed MacKay. But when we talk about stuff like Blood Hunt or his Moon Knight series, because when they did the whole Vengeance of Moon Knight series, it was like, oh, who's the new Moon Knight? And all of the most reasonable answers that could have been put up, none of them ever came up. It ended up being the Shroud, a character who had not even interacted with Moon Knight recently. I think he was depicted in a non-speaking capacity in a background shot, and that was it. There was no other interaction beyond that. He didn't even say anything. He was just there, and as quick as you saw him, he was gone immediately. So the whole setup, it was trying to pick the most unobvious person possible to increase the surprise factor, only to really just result in letdown. So I'm hoping that Jed MacKay isn't going to tease this whole thing out and try and make it seem like, oh, it could be, oh my god, it could be anybody, and then everybody's going to be coming up with really logical things, and then we're going to find out that it's like dupe. I don't know, I'm not saying it's going to be dupe, but I'm just saying, honestly, it would be less surprising if it was Cypher because of what's going on lately. The fact that Cypher is aware that there's a Splinter Cell in the O&E, it does kind of make me wonder if maybe that might, you know, be somewhere in there. Or, yeah, I don't know, it could be something that's been teased in an issue of Astonishing X-Men on Marvel Unlimited that I don't know if anybody even reads. There's a lot of factors that can play into it. But yeah, ultimately, I'm interested to see where it's gonna go. There's lots of other cool stuff, but that was really, to me, the most interesting thing that was going on in that book. But anyway, you guys let me know what you thought about it. And until next time, keep it plus ultra. We out of here. Peace out.